Have you ever walked into someone's home and felt calm in a way you couldn't quite explain? Not because it was fancy or expensive, but because there was simply less. Fewer objects, fewer distractions, clear surfaces, open space, and somehow your mind felt quieter just being there. Meanwhile, your own space might be full of useful things, sentimental things, just-in-case things, drawers that barely close, closets that hold versions of yourself from years ago. And maybe every now and then you feel this strange urge to clear it all out, to simplify, to breathe. Some people feel that urge strongly, almost instinctively. They're drawn to minimalism not as a trend, not as a design style, but as something deeper, something psychological. And if you're one of those people, if the idea of owning less feels strangely comforting, there's a good chance your brain is searching for something more meaningful than empty shelves. Because being drawn to minimalism is rarely about objects. It's about how your mind experiences the world. Your brain is constantly processing information. Every object in your environment sends signals: colors, shapes, textures, memories, decisions. Should I use this? Keep this? Clean this? Fix this? Even if you're not consciously thinking about it, your brain is quietly tracking everything around you. Psychologists sometimes call this cognitive load, the total amount of mental effort being used in your working memory. The more visual noise around you, the more subtle decisions your brain has to make. And over time, that background effort turns into fatigue. This is why clutter doesn't just fill a room, it fills your mind. People who feel drawn to minimalism often have a heightened sensitivity to this invisible mental noise. They walk into crowded spaces and feel tension without knowing why. Their attention gets pulled in too many directions. The environment feels loud, even when it's silent. For them, minimalism isn't aesthetic preference, it's psychological relief. Imagine your mind as a computer with too many tabs open. Nothing crashes immediately, everything still works, but slowly performance drops. Things lag, focus becomes harder, decisions feel heavier than they should. Minimalism is like closing those extra tabs. And here's the interesting part. Research in environmental psychology has shown that people perform better cognitively in simplified environments. Attention improves, stress hormones drop. Even creativity can increase when distractions decrease. A cleaner environment gives the brain fewer competing signals, allowing it to settle into deeper focus. But the psychology goes even deeper than mental clarity. Many people who feel pulled toward minimalism share a subtle emotional pattern. They are sensitive to overwhelm. Not weak, not fragile, just perceptive. They notice when life becomes too crowded, socially, emotionally, or mentally, and physical simplicity becomes a way of restoring balance. Sometimes this starts early. A child growing up in a chaotic household might learn to create small islands of order: a tidy desk, a carefully arranged shelf, a controlled corner of the world where things make sense. Minimalism becomes a quiet form of emotional regulation. It's not always conscious. Most people who declutter don't say, "I am stabilizing my nervous system." They say, "I just feel better when things are simple." But the effect is real. When your environment is predictable and intentional, your brain relaxes. There are fewer unknowns to track, fewer surprises to manage. Order signals safety, and safety allows the mind to rest. There's also something interesting about identity in minimalism. Most cultures subtly teach us that identity is built through accumulation. More clothes, more gadgets, more decorations, more proof of success. Ownership becomes a way of answering the question, "Who am I?" Minimalism flips that question around. Instead of asking, "What do I own?" minimalists often ask, "What actually matters?" And psychologically, that shift can feel liberating, because every object carries a tiny responsibility to maintain it, store it, protect it, replace it, organize it, decide about it. Even unused objects quietly demand attention. Some minimalists describe a strange sense of lightness after letting things go. Not just physical lightness, but mental and emotional lightness. Almost like walking with a heavy backpack for years and suddenly taking it off. Nothing magical happened, but something changed internally. The brain interprets reduced burden as freedom. Interestingly, people drawn to minimalism often have strong internal worlds. They think deeply, reflect often, notice subtle emotional shifts, and because of that, they value mental space more than physical abundance. They would rather have time to think than things to manage. There's also a quiet rebellion inside minimalism. Modern life constantly encourages consumption. New devices, new trends, new upgrades, new versions of yourself waiting to be purchased. Minimalism gently resists that pressure. Not loudly, not aggressively, just quietly saying, enough. And psychologically, that word carries surprising power. Because when you choose enough, you step outside the endless cycle of comparison. The pressure to keep up softens. The sense of always needing more begins to fade. Minimalism becomes less about restriction and more about independence. But there's another side that often goes unnoticed. People drawn to minimalism often are searching for control in a world that feels unpredictable. Life changes, relationships shift, jobs come and go, plans collapse, the future remains uncertain. But your physical environment can be shaped, adjusted, simplified. It becomes one area where intention is possible. And sometimes, choosing what stays and what goes becomes a symbolic act, a way of saying, I decide what has a place in my life. Even the act of decluttering has psychological meaning. Picking up an object forces a small confrontation with the past. Who was I when I bought this? Why did I keep it? Do I still need it? In that sense, minimalism is almost autobiographical. Each item you release becomes a tiny story you finish telling. You move forward by letting go. And maybe that's why minimalism can feel strangely emotional. People sometimes expect decluttering to be practical and logical, but instead it becomes reflective. Memories surface, versions of yourself appear and disappear, and gradually what remains begins to look more like the person you are now. Minimalism also changes how you experience time. When your environment is simpler, everyday actions require less effort. Finding things becomes easier, cleaning becomes faster, decisions become fewer. Small frictions disappear, and those tiny saved moments accumulate into something bigger, mental breathing room. It's subtle, but powerful. Instead of rushing through life surrounded by excess, minimalists often experience a slower psychological rhythm, not necessarily a slower lifestyle, but a quieter internal pace. And in a world that constantly accelerates, that quiet pace feels almost radical. But minimalism isn't perfection. Minimalists still get distracted, still accumulate things, still feel overwhelmed sometimes. The difference is awareness. They notice sooner when life becomes too crowded. They feel the tension building, and they instinctively begin simplifying again, not as a rule, as a reset. If you find yourself drawn to minimalism, it might mean your mind values clarity over stimulation, meaning over accumulation, intention over habit. It might mean you understand, even if you can't always explain it, that peace often comes not from adding more to your life, but from gently removing what no longer belongs. And maybe minimalism isn't really about empty rooms or clean surfaces at all. Maybe it's about making space, space to think, space to feel, space to become the version of yourself that isn't buried under noise. Because sometimes the most meaningful change isn't what you bring into your life, it's what you finally allow yourself to let go of. And if part of you feels pulled toward that simplicity, toward that quiet, it might not be a trend you're following. It might be your mind recognizing what helps it breathe. So I'm curious, when do you feel most clear? When your space is full or when it's open?
Sometimes the answer to that question reveals more about your psychology than you might expect. And if exploring the hidden patterns behind everyday behaviors interests you, you might want to stay around for the next conversation. There's always another layer to understand.